on the podcast today, we're going to speak about why Taoism is a path of amorality and why it is actually in opposition to morality itself. And so a lot of people get this confused, right? Like, because even recently, a guy who runs a famous Taoist page in air quotes, said to me about one of my videos, the cannibal thief who ate Confucius's liver, it's a bit violent, isn't it? And it's like, that's a Confucian response. And you're not seeing beneath the veneer of that story. You're judging a book by its cover. You know, to look at the Robert Joe story, obviously, it's a parody. It's not an actual event. It's making humor and making light of how uptight and moralistic.
And also that person's reaction shows how much he is conditioned to react like that, to perceive things based on morality.
Exactly. And him being a Westerner, he's conditioned with Christian morality, right? So we have to keep that in mind, that most of the morality in the West is based on Christian morality. And if we look at Taoism itself is amoral. And a lot of people think that amorality means it's immoral. But that's not true. Because as Lao-tzu would say, morality leads to immorality. So when you create morality, you instantly create bad people. The opposite, you create bad people. And that's why in the Tao Te Ching, it says when you create beautiful, you create its opposite. You create ugly. When you create good, you create bad. Now, if we look at it from the Taoist perspective, we're all fundamentally good. We're innately good. We don't need to cultivate to become good. We don't need social standards to be good or a belief system to be good. It's diametrically opposed to all of that because it's a natural methodology. And that's what people don't understand. They think that, well, some people probably think that nature itself has some sort of form of morality, but it doesn't. The morality in nature, if we're going to say it has some sort of morality, is just the way that Mencius would say that, and also the way that Lao-tzu would say that those natural feelings we have towards a situation. So, using the boy in the well situation where the boy goes to fall into a well, we all naturally have a feeling to, we ought to save that boy, and we don't think about ourselves in that moment.
Yeah.
So that's just the natural way. That's the natural law in nature, right? And when we all have that deep within us. But what warps that is this socialization we go through and this sense of ethics and morality that are superimposed on us, that are supposed to define, a person, a superior person or a gentleman. Yeah.
Yes, in the Far Eastern Asia, in ancient Far Eastern Asia, especially in China, Confucius created this model of ideal society, which consists of ideal gentleman, human being, right? And that model of society and that model of gentleman is based on what Zhuangzi would say it's almost a mission impossible. That's impossible to even achieve in the society, in ideal society. That's why it only stays as ideal model of society and a human being, right? Because there's too many things that you need to follow. Right? You need to act a certain way. You need to dress up a certain way. You need to also use a right verbal language and whatnot. And too many things comes in. So what that does is to establish who you appear in front of other people around you first, before you cultivate good inner self, right? So that's to more so establish identity first comes in. Becoming somebody first, then cultivate inner world, right? Yeah. Because it's very superficial based society, which is what Confucius said is moral.
Yeah. And that's part of the crux of the problem, right? So if we look at modern society, or if we look at the last few thousand years, if we look at Christian morality, you have Jesus as this inhumane standard for people to live up to. So to be completely pure of sin and this and that, which actually there's a lot of things that, according to the Bible and Christianity, what we would call like sin, but it's just natural human inclinations for people, right? And so that begins to develop some sort of like psychopathy within, a pathology within that individual, because they're trying to live up to an impossible standard that's been set by a group of people, that this is who we should live up to be, and if you can't live up to that standard, you are going to go to hell, or something will negative will happen to you because you're not living up to the standard. Your life will not be blessed. And so everyone then begins to try and, as you said, create this identity to fall in line with a certain belief structure, and then the good and the good will be cultivated, and so you have this set standard of who you should be, and then once you've developed this identity, like you said, it's a superficial identity, obviously, and then you begin to come in harmony with whatever the belief system tells you to be. But as we see especially with Christianity and this and that, it doesn't contribute to the health and sanity of all people. It may benefit some people, but it doesn't contribute to the health and sanity of all people.
Yeah, when you mentioned that the sin in Christianity, that sinful act, what they say the sinful act in Christianity is that something actually against our human nature, right? That's where the conflict happens within the human being.
Yes.
Like a certain act is regarded as sinful act under Christianity, so that you go against that. So you're almost going against your own nature, right?
Yes.
So that is to cause a lot of mental health problem and also biological problem, right? That's why there might be a lot of psychological issues within and those people, and that is to also say like a lot of sexual instinctual desires, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that's just part of nature, part as a species, as a human being, part of nature, and that's just something naturally arise, which we can't really control, right?
No.
But that also goes under sinful act at certain circumstance, right? So that they label it as a evil act, and that is to cause a lot of problem within ourselves.
Of course. And so when they set a mandate like that, you're naturally going to create that friction within people, and you can't fight nature. You can't fight nature. For example, for thousands of years, homosexuals have been condemned by society, even though there has always been gay and lesbian people all throughout history. Some cultures embrace them more than others. You and I have lived in Asia a lot. They are embraced in a lot of places, such as Thailand. Not even embraced, they're just part of the fabric. But there's an understanding, especially in Buddhist cultures, there are people like that. And it's not that that's evil or bad, it's just the way things are.
Because people just don't even have any concept of like men should be men forever, or woman should be woman forever. They don't have such concrete concept in that society, in those society. So that some male person come up and want to become a lady, transgender, and people have no such reaction whatsoever. Oh, that's what that individual wants to be, and like then you basically have no say, right? Because you don't come up with an agenda to be against that individual.
Yeah. Well, see, this is a big problem in the West, right? Sexual orientation is such a big focus, whereas when you go into Eastern cultures, sexual orientation is way down the list. Enlightenment's the highest, you know what I mean? And being in harmony with the world and society is obviously, you are in harmony with society in that when you are enlightened. But things like sexual orientation, they're way down the list. And this is why certain spiritual paths, especially in Asia, got warped by Western thinking, because Western thinking is so focused on sexual orientation. So, for example, if we look at Tantra, Tantra was warped to be molded towards something that has something to do with sex, but it doesn't. It's completely different. It's talking about the two universal principles that flow within all of us, not something to do with feminine and masculine in the physical sense.
That's part of Tantra.
Yeah.
That's just being part of Tantra. That is not
That's
Tantra.
not Tantra, no,
Yeah.
of course. And so that's what happens, right? There's a sexual orientation. There's such a focus on sexual orientation in the West. And that is infused in their religions, such as Christianity, Islam, Judaism. And so when things like homosexuality come about, then that's thought of as that's outside the spectrum of natural law, even though within those homosexuals, that's their sexual inclination. And to fight that is actually ridiculous, you know. So that's what has happened for thousands of years within, especially the Abrahamic faiths, is that there has been individuals who have unfortunately taken their own life and this and that because they do want to believe in the religion, but they're constantly told by their religion that their way of feeling and their sexual orientation is sinful and against the way of nature. And it's not. This is where we've got to bring in the concept of Li in Taoism, because Li in Taoism is like an organic pattern, and nature has an organic pattern, and that is part of an organic pattern, right? So homosexuality is an organic pattern that flows through or is imprinted on an individual, and that's just their sexual orientation. There's nothing more to even think about there. And so this really brings to the forefront how ridiculous actually morality is, because what we've seen over the last few thousand years is society is starting to become more accepting of people like homosexuals and you know, transgender and different ideas and groups of people, and especially the Abrahamic faiths are trying to keep up, and they've got their own PR scheme going on, like, because especially when we see Pope Francis now, right? Like the Catholic Church has become more accepting of gay, lesbian, and transgender people. But if we went just back 20 years ago, or not even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, they're not accepted, and it is sinful. And I think that a lot of people still within Christianity would still think that, because that's the older morality that Christianity was promoting. But it doesn't match up with the society in the modern world.
The nature always changes, right? And the organic pattern in Taoism, that Li, is based on the changes of nature. And that's when morality creates a friction with what's happening around.
The way things are.
Well, yes, way things are. Because the way things are, what's happening around the world is just like nature. Whether that's society, whether that's a human behavior, whatever that might be, it always changes because our mentality changes. We are evolutionary species, so that everything is change. But morality itself is based on strong identity, and that's very concrete concept as well. So that concrete concept is, of course, opposed to change of nature.
Yes.
That's when morality itself has a problem with that. That's why Pope had realized that he had to change his position for the world and to find a position in Catholicism in the world, right? So that's the biggest problem lies with the morality. It's just not changeable. Like,
and who knows if he's genuine about that too.
Well, yeah, that's
it
true.
could be just a
political reason.
Yeah, reason. And even if we look at it from a Taoist perspective, like, you know, if we look at the river analogy, if you're fighting the river of where nature is going, then you will drown or you will suffer greatly in trying to fight the current. And that's kind of what's happened with a lot of, especially Western religions. They've tried to essentially hold their position hold their moral position, but nature is constantly pressing up against them. And they are, well, if we look at the decrease in the numbers in Christianity in the last 100 to 200 years, then they're trying to hold on to their survival. So if they don't change and adapt, then, you know, people with modern intelligence can't accept an older moral disposition, you know, because their morality was based on a culture and a people thousands of years ago. It doesn't match now.
Yeah.
And this is why Eastern spirituality, and I have no problem in saying this, but this is why Eastern spirituality always trumps Western religions, because it doesn't have a set... I mean, we can look at Hinduism. It does have some set values and so forth and so on. But if we look at, if we look at Hindu culture, homosexuality has always been embraced. And that's why you see in like some of the architecture and this and that all around the world. I mean, I know that they haven't taken on board homosexuality within the society that well, but it's always been a part of the culture. You know, you go to Madurai and you go to some of the temples and you see homosexual iconography and so forth and so on. But, and you know, in talking about especially Taoism, is that, and also Buddhism as well, all three of them you could say, is that they're following a natural way, that there's not a set standard of how life should be, or a set moral perspective of how life should be, because life invariably changes, as you mentioned, invariably changes, and will continue to change. And if you don't move with that nature, then you fall out of accord. And so Taoism itself is about following the way of nature, about aligning with it and moving with it. And that's where you gain the de, right? That's where you gain the virtue, because the Tao's power becomes your power, because you're just naturally moving with it. And as a society, if we did that, then that would bring about what we would call in Taoism a social virtue. There would be a social virtue or a communal virtue where we would be moving in that direction. But what do we have? Because of the indoctrination of morality that has been inculcated into most of us, is that even the people who are fighting injustice and so forth and so on, they have a strong sense of morality and belief and agendas of what they think should be the way, and so they're in conflict with the older way. So they're both wrong, you see? They're both wrong.
It's as if they're in competition, who's more moral.
Yeah, who's more moral, yeah.
But the morality itself is man-made.
Man-made, yes.
It's artificial concept that you made it as a concrete agenda for yourself to defend your own opinion or whatever you have. And that is just meant to come to friction with one and with one another. Yeah,
it can only be that way.
Yeah,
you know, that's why there's a growing. Well, it's a minority, right? When we look at social justice warriors, I know. See, the media, they highlight social justice warriors, but they're such a small fragment of society, and so usually the smaller groups are usually the loudest groups in the world. But they themselves are an aspect of violence, because they're fighting a system or fighting an older set of morality that they don't agree with. But they have their own sense of morality. And usually, and this is where we get into, like, you know, left versus right, you know, political slants and liberal versus conservative and all of this rubbish, which is actually, from a distance, it's just nonsense. It's, again, you're creating opposition, you know. So if you look at it from a Taoist perspective, if you have left, I kind of don't even know which one. If you have left, then you have to have right. That's why there are those two branches of those two ways of thinking about the world, you know, from a political perspective. But in reality, there is no separation between left and right. There is.
All part of the same thing.
Part of the same thing. You're creating an artificial separation. And that's one of the things it's hard to fathom with, especially with politics and the way that people politically think, and all of these social justice warriors and all these people who, you know, on the other spectrum of social justice warriors, is that people think that there is a universal conservative way of thinking and a universal liberal way of thinking, and that's nonsense. When you unpack your own life and you understand your own mind, you will notice that you are conservative in some areas of your life, but also liberal in your thinking in other areas. It's not like
one or the other.
One or the other. And see, that's a Western mentality where you have the category and objects perspective where we have to have a category for this to make sense of it. And it's like, no, but the reality is lucid. It's not like, it's not set, it's not compartmentalized. And that's how Westerners think, and that's sadly moving into the East, especially in India and places like that, where you have this East-West dichotomy going on, but it doesn't really exist, you know what I mean? You've identified with a political mentality that you think reflects who you are, and it doesn't, because your sentiment will change, you know.
And the world had become much more individualistic than ever, I think. And because of that reason, and also because of the social media platforms being developed nowadays, so that I think many of us feel that we have a voice, right? Oh, we do have voice, of course, but we have voice in a sense to influence other people. And that your voice and your own agenda is as if more moral than others or superior than others. And they become very loud. And that creates so much conflict.
It's very un-Taoist, right?
Yeah.
You're not allowing life to happen. You're not following the way. You're just trying to force your perspective through loudness and through being rude, trolling people. You know, you see it online, right? You see these social justice warriors online trolling people on Twitter and this and that. And it's so immature. Like I don't understand that. You know what I mean? I'm too old school. When I see that, I think like that's something I would do when I was 5. Seriously, like it's something you do when you're 5, right?
Fighting over just
fighting over petty little things.
Yeah.
Like it's so hard to fathom that these are supposed to be mature adults who are doing this.
It's almost like it's nothing to do with them being moral at all.
No.
It's almost like they just want to win the argument.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to.
That's what it comes down to, yeah. It's about saving face. It's individualistic, right? You're trying to save face. You're trying to get your perspective across, save face, and so that you look the best and you look the most moral and you look.
Yeah.
It's all virtue signaling, you know. You're signaling your so-called virtue to the world. Like, look, see, I won the argument. I've proven my point, and so forth and so on. And it's like, what? Like, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, that's just such childish behavior.
Yeah. And then you create double standards. See, the thing is, the loudest create double standards. So the social justice warriors and the people protesting and this and that, they're so loud that they will create double standards. And then other people then are fearful to speak the truth because the media and that, for whatever reason, highlight the minority, which makes other people afraid of speaking their own mind. This is why someone like, for example, Jordan Peterson was criticized a lot when he came out and spoke his mind. You don't have to agree with Jordan Peterson. We have the right to not agree. But to not accept that he makes some sense means you are in the dark. You know, you're in the dark and you've got your head in the sand about a lot of issues. And you've created a standard that creates its own double standard, you know. So, and you see this a lot, right? You see this a lot in the world. We've been trying, you know, there's been the fight for injustice, right, all around the world, no matter whether it's racism or sexism or what have you. But then what people often do is they create a double standard with that. They create something where something is, one way of thinking is acceptable, but the other way is not acceptable. So how can you ever come to an understanding? And how can you ever understand other people's opinions if you're creating that set of rules and regulations?
Yeah.
This is why in the Tao Te Ching, Lao-tzu would say, renounce wisdom, renounce morality, and people will rediscover filial piety and love. instead of trying to impose a law of this is how flower piety works, or this is how universal love works, or this is how understanding and tolerance works, you need to renounce all that and realize that those standards can't produce what they're trying to produce. They can't. And so that's what Lao-tzu understood. He understood that if you have a moral disposition, then that creates instantly its opposite. It creates its opposite.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot in the world today, where people are so invested in fighting against a certain cause. But it's ironic because what people don't understand is in fighting against certain causes, you are creating monsters in the other spectrum.
The very act that you are trying to impose your own sense of morality is exactly what you're creating, something that you were to prevent from the start.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's that's something that people are very blind.
Very blind about. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point because you're fighting for something.
But that's what you're creating.
But you're creating it.
Yeah.
And that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
That's the truth. And we see that. So, for example, we know that when we are teenagers, right? And we have all been, likely who are listening and watching this podcast, we've all been teenagers. And so when society or a religious system or what have you puts an impossible moral structure upon you, you instantly rebel. And it's not that you want to, but it's just because they've planted a seed that something is bad.
Yeah.
But you're inquisitive because we're humans
Yeah,
and we have a
curious,
mind. You're
right?
curious. My mum was telling me, and she was a smoker, make sure you never smoke and this and that. And look, when I was 12 and that, I'm like, yeah, but I was 12, you know what I mean? Like 12, you know. And once I'm 15, I'm, what's going on, you know? And then when mum found out because I used to smoke back then, for all that, listen, I smoked for a while from my mid-teens to mid-20s. Obviously not to the benefit of my health, but cigarettes here too, smoking cigarettes. And then, so instantly when it was put upon me, I instantly went out and wanted to try. Yeah. I'm going to give it a crack. Like, what's so evil about this? And that's naturally our reaction. And actually, that's our reaction even in adulthood to certain things. Or you shouldn't, don't look around that corner. Instantly, you tell someone, don't look around that corner. Everyone's like,
What's there?
I wonder what's there. Like, what's this guy paranoid about? And so that's what happens, right? That's nature. That's nature. Nature is inquisitive. Nature is curious about life. And see, you're making cigarettes evil. Now, are cigarettes bad for your health? Yes. Are they evil? No. Don't confuse the two. Like, evil in itself doesn't exist. We just equate evil with whatever is usually unnatural or what is unhealthy or what is to the detriment of someone's life. But is it evil? And it's not evil. Evil is a Western concept. And so instantly when you're making it evil, then you're gonna make people interested in whatever it is. So you see that, we see that with, especially with Abrahamic religions, where, people are, say if they are a homosexual, intrinsically, their orientation is homosexuality, but the religions tell them, don't do that, don't do this. They're still gonna, that's gonna even make them, but their inclination is that anyway, so they're gonna do that regardless.
Yeah.
So religions like that will tell you in similar vein, don't drink and don't do this and don't do that, and then you got people out on the piss all night. You know what I mean? Like, and so you're creating a rule and a regulation, you're creating the opposite to that, or you're creating people who want to run counter to that. And this is why, and you and I talk about this privately all the time, this is why a lot of Westerners especially love living in Asia. And it's there's so many reasons why you and I love living in Asia, but when you go to somewhere like India, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, wherever, specifically in South Asia or Southeast Asia, rules and regulations are laxed, right? Like it's not as uptight as Western culture. And so when Westerners go there, they're like, like your shoulders, you have a feeling even in your body that you've never had, where the rules and regulations are not even that uptight.
It's a very interesting thing is that we get to experience that, like a nervous system somehow knows that you can relax now.
Yeah, you can relax now.
Like,
yeah.
and you will feel at ease as you never felt that sort of ease in your life, right? And there's nothing to really think about. And even like little things, as they take it as just a social etiquette. People are so civil so that they don't need to be told what you should be doing and what you should not be doing. Yeah, so it's very very gentle people, and they're not uptight at all, but they know how to deal with one another. Yeah. And very gentleman type of people. Very manner is very good. Yeah.
Well, let's look at Thailand, right? Like when everyone that goes to Thailand will say, "Oh, the people are amazing. Always happy and so polite, and this and that." Yeah, because their rules and regulations are not choking them, so they can't breathe. So the morality and the rules and the regulations and the ethics we create in the West is choking us to death, because they are in some sense standards that most people can't live up to. And somewhere like Thailand understands that they have certain rules and regulations, right? But they're not so concrete. You can kind of poke a little hole in them every now and again. Like you can talk your way out of a speeding ticket, and if you get talking to the police officer, he'll like, just watch yourself. You know what I mean? Like there were things like this. You can, if there's a road here and you need to get just to here, but you're on a big highway, just to turn into this street, you can ride backwards on the road and on the side of the thing. And if a police officer sees you, he's just like, you move along. So but if you did that in the West, if you were riding the wrong way on the highway just for a little bit, you got...
And nowadays, the cameras everywhere.
And cameras everywhere. You are finished. You know what I mean? So it's just amazing, because not having that so tight structure loosens the people's hearts and minds and allows them just to be genuine, because somewhere like Thailand understands that not everyone is the same. So to have impossible standards to live up to is actually not fair in a sense, because everyone psychologically, physically are not the same. They're not. But some stiff in a tie has created a society with rules and regulations and a certain moral ethics that we're all supposed to live up to based on their opinion of how it should be. But they weren't thinking about the guy in Fortitude Valley in Brisbane, for example, who's doing it tough. Or they weren't thinking about the homeless people in Los Angeles. They didn't have these people in mind. You know what I mean?
More we have rules and regulations, I think we more get to abandon the people who are different.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is to say that how much society or government in general don't trust people, don't trust their own people in their country, right? Yeah. Therefore, this endless cycle keeps going on. More rules and regulations, right? And they change the rules and regulations every time. Yeah. And you don't know what to follow. And you need to research for yourself, but then there's tons of different things to look at. And all the languages that our lawyers would use, we have no idea, right? And more rules and regulations there are, more we don't trust people, more we don't trust government and society. Right? Yep. But for example, like Thailand, there is no such strong rules and regulations because they all behave themselves. Yeah. And they trust one another. They live in harmony, in community, and they help each other without a think of getting something out of it, right? And that's actually that story that Confucius and Lao-tzu's conversation. They call the Zhuangzi wrote this.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
imaginary dialogue,
Yeah.
yes. And then Confucius come up to Lao-tzu talking about charity. He wanted to discuss about the charity. It's just, charity is such a good idea to help one another, and we help people who are in a poor situation and they need help, and and who are lacking a lot of things, and we can go and help out these people, make their situation better and whatnot. But then Lao-tzu just scoffed at him. What charity are you talking about? Yeah.
Exactly.
When it needs to rain, it rains. When the sun needs to come up, sun will come up. And so the nature, the world itself is just functioning just fine.
Yeah.
Right? So that's to show the Confucius that how much he himself in that dialogue thought that is a right thing to be doing.
Yeah.
And that's over a sense of control, right?
Yeah, it is control.
And the control is based on not trusting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and one of Lao-tzu's points is that in Confucius creating all of this rules and regulations and so forth and so on, that's why there's a need for charity and duty and universal love. And Lao-tzu saying, if you had never created any of this, you idiot, then we wouldn't have to be talking about charity and duty and so forth and so on. Because, this, like you said, the sun comes up in the morning, the stars, they're doing the same thing every day. What makes human beings special? Why should human beings have to control nature and control each other? That's one of the main points of Taoism, right?
And one side effect with the charity is that because people doing, they do good work, charity work, but that gives you a certain sense of identity that they are doing good things. I'm a good person.
Yeah, it's moral based.
Yeah, and they act out of that place and they judge themselves from that place, which is a little bit cringe.
Yeah,
for
a bit
me.
cringy, yeah.
Whereas you would help other people because that's what people do.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Well, that would be completely Lao-tzu's perspective, right? Charity, we all think of that as charity.
Yeah. You just do it.
Because that is just right thing to be doing.
Yeah.
It's not something that you need to label it as that's a good thing. You're doing good deed.
Because people are trying to be pious, see? They're trying to live up to a standard of being virtuous. You know, like in especially like spiritual paths like Christianity, Confucianism, so forth and so on. They create these standards. And that's when then you get, like you said, the cringy people who are on Instagram giving food to a beggar. Like, look at me, look what I'm doing. It's virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling. It's not from the heart.
Yeah.
It's not from the heart. And Lao-tzu's like, you don't need rules and that to help each other. Actually, the rules and that keep you actually more separate from each other. The morality keeps you more separate. You see, because like you said, you're creating an identity, you're creating self-interest, you're creating separation between one another.
It naturally abandons people who, let's say, don't participate in charity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like, they're not doing good deed. They don't have good heart.
They don't have a good
Like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not the way.
There's just people are in different circumstances.
Yeah.
You need to see it that way. People are in different circumstances and have different life situations. That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing more to look at. But again, you raise a good point because you're creating a separation between those who support charity and those who don't, as if the ones who don't are bad, and that's not true. You know,
Yeah.
like you said, there's a large portion of people who do support charities who are just virtue signaling. Look at most of the billionaires and this and that. They don't really have a vested interest. It is great that they do contribute money and this and that, but they're kind of like ticking boxes.
Yeah.
They don't go out there and get their hands dirty without the cameras.
That's right.
You know, you've worked at Mother House in Calcutta. How many selfless people go there without? This is pre-social media when you were working
Exactly.
there.
Yeah.
You're not there going.
I had no phone, no mobile phone.
You still don't have one.
Yeah, well, basically, yes, I don't.
So, you know, like you're doing it because that's what is needed. That's what just has to be done. That's what Lao-tzu's point is. Like if you see someone on on the side of the road and they're a bit hungry, and you have it. Say if you have a chocolate pie, you just, here you go, man, I don't need it, I just had lunch. That's it, and you just keep going. Or if you have a chat or something, I don't know. But there's nothing more to think about.
Yeah.
See, there's not a standard of morality that you need to live up to. You're in sync with nature. You know, you see animals acting that way, right? You see one animal that may not have food or so forth and so on, and then there's situations where another animal will come over and give it some food because it's not as maybe physically built and it can't protect itself as much. But there is that intrinsic Li within everything that knows that that animal needs something as well. You know, just give them a little bit of dog meat or whatever. Like, and it's not to say that there isn't competition in nature. Of course there is, but there is that as well. There is that fundamental goodness there. And the problem with the human mind is we've taken that fundamental goodness and we've put that up on a pedestal. Yeah. And anything that falls out of a line with that, we say is evil and bad, and we condemn it. And then you set up a standard. A standard. And we can't live up. Standards and labels are not natural. And like, I know that you and I harp on about this within the podcast all the time, but if you're following, especially Taoism, you can't follow standards and labels. And you also can't be a moralistic person if you're going to follow Taoism, because the Taoist sage is not touched by the drama of the world. Yeah. They follow the way, but it doesn't mean they're not generous and they're not and they don't care. Yeah. They know that if they contribute to this artificial illusion of impartiality, that's only going to contribute to more conflict and down the line. In some sense, your actions, especially in that regard, have such a significant effect because you're kind of contributing to the drama, right? You're adding fuel to the fire, and we don't need no more fuel on the fire. And so this is what irks me, like I mentioned earlier about that individual who runs that Taoist page, is that Taoism's not really well understood because of the way China kind of went with Maoism and with Confucian, with communism. The fundamental principles and understanding and the deeper meaning of Taoism was kind of lost. So the understandings of the Zhuangzi text and the Tao Te Ching were kind of then overlaid into, like, let's say, certain moral ethics, and were kind of brought in line with, in some sense, with Buddhist ideas and that as well. But even though that there may be Buddhist elements within certain elements of Taoism, they are still two opposed paths in some sense, especially when we talk about morality. Because there's no sort of set. The way, the Tao, is about just following the way of nature. You don't have to be vegetarian. You don't have to do anything. You have to understand the way. You have to come into alignment with the way of the universe. And that's a path of letting go, and also letting go of morality, letting go of your sense of self, and allowing that. And if that means that you're going to take up a job in a soup kitchen, that is what the Tao will determine for you. You will be in a situation that you'll end up in a soup kitchen working for the homeless people. And that's all good. Yeah. But don't start to associate that with being pious and that you're more moral than a guy in a pub on a Friday night getting smashed. That's the difference, right? Like Lao-tzu would say, we still need the guy in the pub getting smashed. It's just nature. That's always going to be that way. Don't try to change it. See, the problems happen when you try to change it. People get annoyed when you're trying to change the way they are. We mentioned homosexuals earlier. They get annoyed when you're trying to impose them. No, you should be heterosexual. It's like, they're not heterosexual, man. Let's leave them alone. Let's let them live their life. Yeah. And that's Lao-tzu's point. Instantly, when you're trying to interfere with life, you're causing conflict.
The morality creates such hypocritical individuals, and dishonest and fraud personalities. Because again, like once you are told what not to do, you want to be doing, right? But because of morals that you want to follow, you want to go to the path with morals, but you still want to have that, want to taste it, like what it's like to be not moral, right?
Yeah,
like
for
go
sure.
against the morals, right? So naturally, it creates conflict within yourself, and that leads to hypocrisy, right?
Yes.
And that's what we see around the world. Again, with this political correctness, people the same. Like people, they want to be pious and moral, but what they're actually doing is not very moral.
No, it's immoral.
Yeah, immoral.
It's immoral.
That's right.
Yeah.
What they're actually doing is very immoral actions.
Yeah.
Which that's something, I guess it's a big blind spot, but they need to come to realization that that's what they're actually doing.
Yeah. Because political correctness is a response of people that are trying to live up to an impossible standard. So all of the social justice warriors in the world and all of these people who are so pious that everyone else is just a grub, they've identified that this world, right, that has happened, with all of its, all of the climate change that's happened, all of the mistakes that people have made in the past and so forth and so on, we're just going to go in the complete opposite direction. And we're going to highlight how stupid they are. But we're going to do it in a way where we're so, we speak a certain way, and we will cancel anyone who falls out of accord with that. That's the beginning of cancel culture, right? Political correctness created cancel culture, where if you say anything, like, for how many times have you seen on Twitter someone might say something, and next minute they're cancelled. I don't even know what that really means. I want to ask some of the social justice warriors, do you want that individual to actually just die and go away? And maybe they would say yes.
That's a pretty sick mind.
It's
though.
a sick mind. Yeah, it's a sick mind. I had actually a social justice warrior trolling one of my podcasts a few weeks ago because I mentioned social justice warriors, and some individuals on the comment section actually, because I'm too old school, I'm out of touch with the way that these trolls operate, and they just alluded to me, hey Jason, this individual is just trolling you, they're trying to, the social justice warriors just pretending to, be in accord with Taoism. And it's like, first of all, social justice, warrior, the three words don't equate to Taoism.
Doesn't make any sense.
It's the complete opposite of Taoist thinking, or it's the complete opposite of the way of nature.
Yeah.
Let's be clear here. When we're talking about Taoism, we're talking about the way of nature. When we're talking about social justice warriors, or we're talking about political correctness, we're talking about a moralistic path, which is based on standards created by people and created by groups of people within society.
That's right.
It's not natural. It's self-interested.
That's right.
You have an agenda. You have a system of beliefs that you want to defend.
Even political correctness, that two words is so contradicting itself.
Yeah.
Politics is based on control. Control is against nature.
Yeah.
Nature is not to control.
Exactly.
Correctness, how do you make something fundamentally unnatural to make it correct? How is it possible?
Sounds Confucian, doesn't it?
It's just, that's why when I heard that term first time, it's just an awkward
Mix.
Yeah, mix.
Yeah. It is an awkward mix.
Yeah.
Political correctness is politically incorrect. To use Osho's words. That's what Osho said. Not that I support Osho in any sense, but he did say some funny things. And it was funny when he said that. He said, I'm politically incorrect. Because again, he was attacked, right, in the 80s by the social justice warriors of that time, because, he
countercultural movement.
Yeah, because he did have some outrageous ideas, and there was a bit of a cult that was built, not a bit of a cult, there was a cult that was built around him and so forth and so on. But it is what it is, Again, the politically correct people and the social justice warriors step up, and they'll call anyone out that doesn't doesn't equate to their way of thinking.
Yeah.
They will call anyone out. That, hey, you can't say that. And so why can't I say that? Actually, the people who do speak out against certain stupidity, like against political correctness and that, are the ones that actually cause fundamental change. I mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier, right? Jordan Peterson constantly pulls apart how ridiculous political correctness is, and he was a target of social justice warriors way back in the day. And again, you don't have to agree with him, but you also don't have to criticize the man and throw him under the bus and think that you're right in doing so and you're pious in doing so. He's still an individual. He's still a human being that needs to be respected and needs to be loved and that as well. You acting this way is only going to contribute to someone's bad mental health.
That kind of reaction toward Jordan Peterson itself is very actually inhumane, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very lack of empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lack of empathy, lack of understanding.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of those people in the social justice warrior movement are young people, but I remember being that young, and I remember I had idealistic mentalities as well, like we all kind of do when we're late teens, early 20s. But it wasn't to the degree that it is now. And I think that's being contributed to by social media, because people can freely exchange ideas and so forth and so on. People can pretend to be as loud as they want, and all they're doing is trying to attract attention, and they're trying to cause drama. And again, that's a flaw in the human psychology, where you're trying to create drama instead of harmony. These social justice warriors should be asking themselves, what I'm going to do today, the protests I'm going to attend, and my actions, are they contributing to more harmony or more conflict? So morality leads to immorality, and that's what Lao-tzu highlighted, right? That's why Taoism is amoral. It's beyond an understanding of rightness and wrongness. It's beyond an understanding of good and bad. It knows that separation creates its opposite and creates actually conflict within the world, creates artificial boundaries that don't exist. These boundaries we've all created don't exist, and I'm not just talking about nationalistic boundaries, I mean psychological boundaries we've created around ourselves.
That's more so.
More so, and that's more so important, right? Actually, the nationalistic boundaries just become a psychological boundary in your mind,
Yeah, it creates too much labels and identities.
Yes.
Which creates too many separations that builds a massive wall higher than Great Wall in your mind, right? Yeah.
And Lao-tzu would say, in letting go of those, the walls come down and you begin to embrace the oneness of reality. You begin to embrace your brothers and sisters, not by trying to, but by letting go of your concepts of this and that, as Zhuangzi would say. Then you begin to evoke real love for one another, evoke this universal love that Confucius was talking about. But Confucius is talking about cultivating it, just like all of the moralistic paths. And so you break that down. And, let's look at America, for example. America is one of the places in the world that's really highlighted morality and especially how Americans should be with each other and so forth and so on. And then there's a big focus. Americans tell themselves this, that they are the land of the free, and you hear these common terms like, the president is the leader of the free world. But then you see everything that's happening in America. Actually, when you say a term like a leader of the free world, it doesn't make sense, because a free world has no leader.
Okay, yep.
So, but it's ironic, right? Because in America, even though, you and I, we love America, and I guess most people do, but when Americans are creating an impossible standard for themselves, they have what they have now. There's a lot of conflict within America at the moment, and it's because of that. They've created an impossible standard to live up to, thinking that they're the pinnacle of the world and thinking that everyone should be focusing on them. But there's many people around the world, and people have their own problems. We all can't be focused on America. I mean? There's things happening in Bangladesh that a lot of Americans probably don't know about, happening in Nepal, happening in, Uganda, that people don't know about. And you and I know about. But so why should we all be looking this way You know, so again, that is one of the great places that could embrace Taoist thinking, because then you could get rid of these impossible standards and this mentality of morality.
Yeah.
And that's what you see a lot with the mass media in America, not just America, but in the whole world, where the mass media is driving a mentality of morality. So they're constantly always showing you, look at these bad guys, look at this, or look at these troublemakers. And so they're constantly impregnating you with morality, kind of giving you this schism in your mind of what is right and what is wrong.
Well, I see that more morals come into the society, and the higher the fear becomes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like they've become more fearful about something, so that they need more morals.
Yeah.
Like it's just that's just how it goes. Where more morals go, where the fear goes. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
That's what I felt when we visited America at that time. These people, like some of the most friendly people you've ever met, right? But I felt so scared of something.
Yeah, there's an artificial threat out there somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of things happen to the country and whatnot, but that also happened to other countries too, right? Around the world.
All around the world.
Some countries had worse, right?
Way worse.
Yeah. So, but the people that had that like deeply embedded the fear in them, something I've found it really odd, you know. And yeah, speaking of morality, especially in America, it happens around the world the same, but I feel America is much stronger because there's that strong social concepts and status, and the mass media promote that very highly over anything, and so that and people follow that, and not to blame people because they themselves are unaware of a lot of things, right? They just get to see what the media promotes, and so that they just follow that morals and ethics and rules and regulations and whatnot, and then they naturally support it because that's what it seems to be right, right? But that's to create more fear, more separation with one another, and no more division. Not just America and the other countries within America as well. Like we've seen so much poverty in America. It was a bit shocking. Like we were like, this is worse than Thailand. There's some areas like
downtown Los Angeles, it felt like it was worse than Calcutta.
Yeah, it
in
was
India.
like felt like slums in Calcutta or Mumbai, like.
But you don't see that on the news, do you?
Exactly.
You don't see that area.
Exactly, but that's the other flip side of this strong moralistic country that we abandon.
There's an ugly side. Yeah.
That we abandon those people that they really need good care. You know?
They need help. Yeah.
And again, that's what Lao-tzu said in the Tao Te Ching. When you mentioned it earlier, once you define what's beautiful, you just simultaneously create what's ugly.
Yes.
That's the good example for somewhere like America. We see those shiny things and what they bring to the world and whatnot. But nobody really pay attention to the other side of it. And that's why that gap becomes just ever reaching and higher and bigger and larger and larger. I don't know how they can create a bridge between it, or even they don't even worry about it. I don't know.
Just got to blow it up and start over again.
But that...
I mean, the social structure.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That might be the only way.
Yeah.
You keep thinking, what could be the good solution, this and that, but it'll all become a Band-Aid solution. It had been. They all had been that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, that fear and that it leans into the individualistic psychology, right? So when you have America being the pinnacle of individualism, instantly when you have a cognitive style that is individualistic, you instantly create self-interest and self-preservation. You're self-interested, but you're also trying to preserve your self-interest. You're trying to preserve yourself and your status within society, and you are wary of anyone else who is out there that may conflict with your way of life, or way of thinking. And so that's, when we look at it from a cognitive science perspective, that is actually one of the detriments of a focus on individualism, is it inherently creates conflict. Because not just nations in conflict, it's individual people in opposition to each other.
Right.
So you have a whole country, there's like 350 million people in America, and it's under the illusion of the United States of America, but everyone is separate, everyone has their own different way of thinking, not because of certain conditioning and this and that, but it's because of the focus on individualism. You ought to be this person, you got to be like, go out there and do it yourself, and this all promotes this sense of separation from the society, in the illusion that it's a united society. But what do we see in Asia? We see united societies without the illusion of a united society, because they come from the holistic cognition rather than the analytic cognition. So you have more of a collectivist perspective, which in itself can be negative too, because like somewhere like China can take on board things like communism and Marxism, and they can be manipulated. But intrinsically for the society itself, people in general, we mentioned Thailand and India and this and that, people in general will just help each other out of their own accord, and there isn't that stiffness to being an individual, and then you don't have this heightened sense of self-interest and self-preservation. That's a survival mentality, right? That's an evolutionary mentality that actually has to be eradicated. And Taoism's about evaporating those boundaries in us so we can merge with the greater world in however way you will. It doesn't mean you have to go out there and, like we mentioned in this thing, be this moralistic person, because that doesn't drive you. The moralism is driven, in some sense, from an individualistic mentality, because you're trying to prop yourself up based on whatever the ethics and the morals are of that, the standards of that society that you live in.
I think a lot of people get it wrong in America is that, like you mentioned about the free world thing, right? A lot of people over there are very proud of being American because it's a land of free world. That's what they think. But their sense of free world being you do whatever you want to do, you think whatever you want to think, and nobody else has a say to that, and you basically can do whatever the hell you want to do in your life. That's how people usually think of what the freedom is, so that within the country they support that, and that only enhances the extreme individualistic mind, and that's kind of inevitable to have conflict with one another, right? But that's false sense of freedom. We know that.
That's not freedom.
That's not freedom.
No.
That's much more to do with selfishness and self-interest, right?
Freedom is freedom from one's mind. That's real freedom.
The real freedom is to demolish that idea of free world, right?
Of course, yeah.
Like
because that again is a moral. That again is a standard.
Yes. That they take that as their morals, so that they live up to that. But that leads to the conflict with one another. So they can't be. You can't have the solution. There is no solution to that.
No. Well, if Lao-tzu became the president of the United States, he'd be saying, you have to dissolve the person.
Let go of it.
You have to let go of yourself.
Yes.
To experience freedom.
Yeah.
You have to let go of yourself to be beneficial to the world. If you're enhancing yourself and you're trying to prop yourself up above other people, then you're only going to get pecked at by society. You're only going to be...
Yeah, right.
So to not incur harm on yourself and others, you need to dissolve yourself and dissolve all of these illusions that there is a so-called free world according to your own perspective.
Yeah, that's right.
So you have to go in the opposite direction. And in the opposite direction is frightening because that's where the individual doesn't exist. And that's Eastern philosophy, right? So that's where the individual doesn't exist. And it's completely frightening, not just for America, it's frightening for anyone in the world. Because we are living have been influenced by America and European ideas. And so you ought to be someone, right? You ought to do this and that. But it's based on an illusion. It's based on an ethical structure of morals and a standard that it's impossible to live up to. And they're actually incorrect. You know, to use that word, they're not right.
That's to completely disregard different diversity in society.
Yeah.
Is what you think of what's right is what's right to you.
Yes.
Might not be for others.
No.
But because of the sake of your own freedom, somehow you have all right to exercise what you think it's right.
Yeah.
That's not a mature action.
Well, what's one of the common comments I get from people? You know, people get agitated online. They think they don't think before they comment and stuff like that. You know, I don't understand that world. But what's one of the most common things when people have, like, so for example, people who come across my channel are interested in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, but when you and I give them the straight dope, it gets uncomfortable. Because from the Taoist perspective, right, say if there's something going on, Americans have a lot of big problems with a lot of the laws and the ethics in the Middle East, right? And so because one society is Christian, one society is Muslim. And so they're of the belief that the Christian mentality in morals and ethics is the way, right? And so when they see what happens in a Muslim country, it conflicts with their way of thinking. And as anyone who is familiar with our channel knows, that Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism have no interest in interfering with what's going on over there. Even if it's so grotesque, you can't even imagine. But that's what's happening there. It's got nothing to do with you. That's how they do things. We follow the path of interference. And in following the path of interference, all things come into harmony. But when you're following the path of interference, of conflict, it can only lead to more conflict and more suffering. Does it mean that some people won't? Does it mean some people won't be, unnecessarily killed, or things that none of us would agree with? Of course, those things happen around the world. They're happening without the media looking at them as well. The media only show you a little slither of what's happening in life. What are you going to do? Are you going to go around and fight everyone's fight? Are you going to go around and oppose everyone's viewpoint? And that's where people get scared with Eastern philosophy, because it's amoral. Lao-tzu is saying, why would you go and fight that battle?
What triggers you to think that you need to do something about it?
Who's made you the law?
Yeah.
Who made you the law to go over to Iraq or whatever and say that this is the way it should be? You see? And that's where morality kills the world. Nietzsche had a really great quote on morality, and I'm not even going to try paraphrasing it, but it was something along those lines, like kind of like morality, the ethics of idiots or something like that. You know what I mean? like making fun of like people who were like that. It was kind of like in a very Zhuangzian way. And so, like, if you look at, for example, India, right? So majority of India is Hindu. And tell me a war where the Hindus went around the world blowing the world up.
They got invaded.
They never invade. They never invade. They got invaded and they then accepted.
Yeah. In the end, they embraced it.
Yeah.
The Islam, right? When the Mughal Empire
of course,
took over India. They embraced it. And what King Ashok became him
Buddhist
monk.
Became Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
The whole place is Taoist. That's why you and I love India, because India is probably the most Taoist country in the world, because it's just a forest. It's just wild, in the best sense of the word. It's wild. It's not so strict with rules and regulations. People are following their own path and in life, and you know, I know that there's the Hindu Dharma there, but that's a good thing there. It's a way of life. It's a culture.
Yes.
You know, it's a very rich culture, and so, and when we look at India, like you said, like when Islam invaded India, I know that obviously there's been conflict between Hindus and Muslims for a while, but it's on and off. You know what I mean? It's not all the time. And the places that you and I have been to, even when we lived in Varanasi, there's a lot of Muslims actually in Varanasi, and everyone's all cool. We go to the Muslim area, the Hindu area, and everyone's all good. You know, you go to the Muslim area, you want a certain type of food. You know what I mean? You go to the Hindu area, you want a certain type of food, but they're all Indians, and they're all really great people. You know.
What makes India the way it is, which is a beautiful country, is because of that reason. They embraced everything. Like when we were in Calcutta, for example, because it's so close to Bangladesh, there's a lot of a large, big community of Muslims there, and like 5 times a day, this.
The salam.
The alarm goes on from the mosques.
Yeah.
Like it brings so much charm to the place.
Oh yeah. Richness.
And there is no conflict. Like I mean, Indians know what they're doing, and you know, there's no conflict whatsoever. It just and that's what Gandhi made. I mean, that's what made Gandhi so great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That he practiced ahimsa.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which is non-violent path. When the pretty much war going on between Hindu and Muslims back then, when he was alive, and he fasted for a very long time, and
yeah, of course. Yeah.
all he wanted was just to live with one another. That's all he wanted.
Along.
Just get along. To
yeah.
be friends with one another.
Yeah.
Stop fighting.
Yeah.
That's all he wanted.
Well, in Australia, what do you have? You have like just get along, or you have this guy's carrying on. So someone who's carrying on is acting like someone who's trying to interfere with things and making a song and dance. We would say in Australia, but let's just get along.
Yes.
Just get along.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Yes.
It's easier to be nice than to be a prick. It's much easier. Why not just get along?
Yeah.
That was Gandhi's mentality. Let's just get along. Like, yeah, I know that there's a past of where the Muslims invaded India, and there may be some Hindus who still are angry about that, and there also may be some Muslims who are angry about the way they were treated during certain periods of time. But let's just squash the beef. Let's just get along, you know. Like, so again, it's just a path of non-interference. It's a path of like just accepting each other and accepting the differences and realizing that there's actually a beauty in that.
And that's the clear evidence there that how just the nature itself can be an ultimate government.
Government, yeah. That's the way of nature.
Just like India.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, like for example, like around the world or even in India, for example, people get annoyed with Christians because of missionaries. They're not annoyed with Christianity itself, and a lot of Christians don't understand this. And why are they annoyed with missionaries? Because it's completely un-Taoist. Because a missionary is out on the street passing out their pamphlets and putting on all of their music and trying to, you know, say that this is the moral path that you need to follow to find God and so forth and so on. And Hindus kind of, you know, not really scoff, but they're like, yeah, that's all good. We like what you do, but we have our thing. And I don't know why you're here, like trying to force your force your way of.
They're not against them.
They're not against
but
them.
They just don't understand why they try to influence other people.
Yeah. Well, there's more Christians in India than there are in Australia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To put it in perspective. I mean, there's not really that many in Australia, but you know what I mean? So there's like, Christianity's great, but why are you pushing it around on other people? Like, are you paranoid about having enough followers, or Like,
True.
you know what I mean?
That's
Like,
true.
are you coming to India because it's poor and there's, are you interested in demographic swamping? Like, are you?
Is it political?
Is it political?
Yeah.
Like, what's your deal? You know what I mean? Like, as I've mentioned on the podcast before, we had that experience in Nepal where the Christians were there and they were basically telling the Nepalese that they were going to hell for following Shiva and Buddha, and it was one of the grossest things I've ever seen in my life, because you're condemning a people for their culture and their evolution based on your
That's
own.
so ignorant.
It's so ignorant, you know, and so that's completely the path of interference. Yeah, that's the path of interference, and so if you want to follow the path of nature, the path of the Tao, you're not interested in being a missionary. You're not interested in trying to influence other people with your way of thinking, which is what our point is. And that's where morality is violent, see? Your morality is based on a system, and you're trying to influence other people, and that is an act of violence. That's why it's immoral. And in speaking about violence, so we need to think about, like we've always mentioned, the tenets of the morality that we follow, right? So if we look at Emmanuel Kant, right? So one of the, more famous philosophers, and his model of ethics and morals, and part of his system, and the funny thing with Kant is Kant believed that his ethics and morals are universal, and they can't be changed. It's just the way things are. And it's really ridiculous when you think about it, because when you look at his system of morals and ethics, you can tell it's from a time and place and a culture that doesn't equate to where we are now. So if we look at a few of the tenets, so if we look at sex, and we look at, what's a couple of the other ones? We look at, servants, death penalties, and even the killing of babies.
Okay.
So when we look at sex, right, he would say that naturally and moralistically, man and woman is the way. That's the natural way. And the unnatural way, and this is Kant's ethics, right? His morality, is that homosexuals are in line with someone who has sex with animals. So they're in that category. And also in that category are premarital and extramarital sex. So if you're having sex before marriage and you're having sex with another person while you're married, then you're in that category as well. And so those people are immoral. But only, and so do you see that's slight Christian indoctrination too, right? So being married and so forth and so on is moral according to Kant. And these are, again, as you said, universal, and they're never unwavering according to Emmanuel. And then on top of that, you have servants, right? So for servants, you have, it is your right to own a servant like you own a thing. Yeah. This is part of his moral and ethics. And it is your right, your ethical duty, if that servant disobeys you, it is your right to hunt them down and do as you please. And this is no lie. And then on top of that, and you will see the hypocrisy and the falsity of Kant's ethics and morality, is when you look at then his opinion of the death penalty, right? Where he looks at the death penalty as something that's great. Because he's saying that murderers need to be dealt with, right? And most of us would obviously not disagree with him on that sentiment. Like, murderers need to be dealt with, and probably best if they're out murdering people, you can't just leave them in society and so forth and so on. And so that's why Kant really supports the death penalty. But the hypocrisy comes when it comes to the fourth one I mentioned, killing the babies, where he believes that if a lady gives birth to a baby out of wedlock, so she's not married, then it's her responsibility to kill that baby. So you see on one side of the spectrum, he's saying murderers ought to be killed, but then he's ordering single mothers to kill their babies.
And that's okay.
And this is universal.
I don't know. That sounds pretty stuff up.
But of course, that's the immorality of Kant's ethics. See, in trying to create his own morals, he created an immoral system. And a lot of people believe in that. And actually, when you look at Kantian philosophy and Kantian ethics and morality, that has influenced a lot of thinking since then.
In the West.
In the West, yeah. Not just him, I mean, you got other guys, like you got Hegel and guys like that. But he has contributed to kind of the moral disposition of a lot of Western thinking.
Right.
Obviously, no one would be in agreement with killing babies. I mean, that's pretty outrageous. But, I mean, if you look at some of the Abrahamic faiths and this and that, they would probably agree with a lot of the other ones he mentioned. Maybe not the servants one, but definitely the death penalty.
Yes.
And also with how homosexuals and people who are into bestiality are in their own spectrum, and the only way to have a relationship is man and woman, a heterosexual relationship.
Sounds like Kantian morality is based on Christian-based moral plus tyrannical moral. That's how it sounds like.
That's how it sounds like, yeah. But that highlights the hypocrisy of morality, right? It highlights that what we think of morality is constantly changing. And it has to change because, like, look at that. If we had Kantian ethics now, what the hell does the world look like? I mean, what are our conversations? You know what I mean? Because there are many single mothers, there are a lot of murderers, there are numerous homosexuals. So what sort of world would we live in?
Yeah.
It's almost, and again, that comes from the mind of one guy. And even his way of thinking comes from Christian thinking, it comes from Western thinking. So why should the world take that on board as if that's true?
Yeah.
And so that morality is constantly, like, for example, in a couple of 100 years' time from now, people will probably look at the morality of our time and go, what the hell were they thinking? What were they talking about? That seemed like they were loony.
Way outdated.
Way outdated. And that's because morality itself, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's what Taoism is saying. Morality itself doesn't work. Because if you unpack it, like we've spoke about many things in the podcast, is that it doesn't matter. Because it comes from someone else. It comes from a system. So who made them the law? And it's not natural. It's not based on nature. And if we look at the world naturally and us as a part of nature, we should be basing all of our actions and our societies and everything should be based on nature. And it's ironic, right, that we are in this kind of battle with nature. It's almost like metaphorical. We're in this battle with nature, with climate change and so forth and so on, because we've followed a different path to nature.
There is somewhat literal and very superficial conflict with the humanity and nature.
And nature, yeah. And we need to align with it.
Yes.
And follow its way.
Yeah. What we need to know is it's gonna be a losing battle, regardless.
Oh, yeah, always.
Humanity wants its way. It's a losing battle. Nature always gonna win.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So might as well just forfeit the battle and just give the W to nature.
Ultimate champion.
Yeah, and we follow because we are nature. That's just ridiculous.
Nature's undefeated.
Undefeated forever.
Forever, yeah. Humanity, we only take the L.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But it's a great point, right? So we have to realize that we are just a part of nature, and actually a small part. And we have to get out of this illusion that we are never going to destroy the planet. We will go, as George Carlin said. We will go, but nature will go on.
Exactly.
We shouldn't think too highly of ourselves.
Nature will go on without humanity.
Yeah.
And it existed so many years before humanity was born.
A lot longer than humanity has been around.
Well, exactly.
We haven't been around that long.
Yeah.
And we're carrying on like we've been around since the dawn of
Forever.
time.
Nah.
No. It's not the way it is.
Not that, yeah.
Humans are here to, to experience the wonder of the universe as a part of it. We are given that opportunity to be conscious of the beauty, but we're missing it because we're confused with the conditioning we have in our mind and this illusion of separation from nature, which then requires a morality. Once you're out of sync with nature, you require a morality. That's what Lao-tzu was saying. Like when we look at pre-Confucian society, so when we look at Taoist societies, there was no need for laws. And as Robert Jurt says to Confucius, we never had all these laws. We didn't need, we didn't have all of these structures and this and that. And everyone got along. Everyone was harmonious. Because we didn't create all of these artificial boundaries. Because they didn't exist. In nature, they don't exist. They exist when you're trying to control nature and when you separate from nature. That's when morality begins. So you start to create large-scale societies, then you instantly have to create a morality because you're creating something that's not natural. And that's Lao-tzu's point to Confucius. And then you create the illusion of a external government, not the natural government, which I talk about in Effortless Living, So that illusion of that this external system is somehow moral and ethical and is going to teach you the way to live in accord with the Tao. But you can't induce the Tao. The Tao isn't something that you buy. It's already in your life. It's animating your life.
Yes. It's always there. It's always there. But we need to empty ourselves out to allow it to go through you.
Yeah.
That's how it's always there.
Yes.
And our perspective is so polluted by a lot of things in society.
Yes.
So that we create too many boundaries and obstacles. But it always has been there, and it's there. It's just for us to choose to allow to govern your life.
Exactly. It was a big element of trust.
Yeah.
Where again, if we knew we were part of nature, we would trust each other and trust the world.
Yeah.
But because we divorce from nature, then we lack trust of each other because people become hypocritical, people become false, and then it's hard to trust each other because you've got fakers basically, and then you have pop culture and everything. What would be called the glib back in the day, like Confucian glib, as Zhuangzi would say, and that's something we ought to avoid. But if you're too wound up in it, wound up in society and wound up in morals and wound up in a sense of entitlement and social justice, then you'll never understand Taoism. And you're still influenced by an external structure. Right? You're still influenced by external systems. Not even government. You're influenced by external ideas of what is right and what is wrong, and so forth and so on. Nature doesn't have right or wrong. The true government, the natural government, as I mentioned in the Effortless Living, is trusting the world, is allowing the world to be as it will. Yeah. And in trusting the world, then we begin to trust each other. But that's a responsibility we all have. That's what we all have individually. That's our responsibility towards each other. You have to really trust. Even the person who seems the most untrustworthy.
It's we need to lower that individualism.
Yeah.
When we lower the individualism, then you allow the nature to be part of your life. Then it'll just, that trust will come, and we will see and we will feel that things are Japan, things are happening according to nature. Yeah, because nowadays that individualism is, I think, way too much.
It's too strong.
Too strong. They create too much conflicts with one another. Too much petty competitions going on. But once we can lower it and just clear up our mind a little bit, and it just dissolves a lot of the separation within ourselves, and when we purely embrace everything and accepting everything, then that trust will come, and then you'll be able to see it's okay. Like things are actually okay without our voice. It actually doesn't need anyone's voice really, because it just does its thing. Yeah. And that's completely fine. That's organic, natural.
Well, think about it this way, and this is what a lot of social justice warriors and people in general don't really think about. People are going around trying to bring justice and so forth and so on to other people and trying to interfere with other people. But that's only been an effect of having mass media. We've only had mass media for not that long.
Right.
So before that, things were happening in other countries that you didn't know about. Things were happening in your neighboring city that you didn't know about.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there was no radio, there was likely no newspaper, and everyone was fine and dandy.
Yeah.
No problems. There may be problems in other places, but in your immediate world, there was no problem. And there was no impulse for you to go out there and change the world. That's all been a response of mass media. And like I mentioned earlier, like the social justice warrior movement in the modern day is heightened because of social media.
Definitely.
Not just mass media are fueling this now, then you've got other people fueling it. And then you've got this bushfire going on that it's never going to get under control because people are going about bringing justice, their version of justice, the wrong way. Lao-tzu would be saying go backwards, you're going forwards and you're marching forward and you're being violent and you're causing conflict where we need to go back.
Yes.
Because all injustice, if we look at it, if we believe there is injustice, was created by having that separatist mindset of them versus us and so forth and so on. We need to get rid of that.
Yes.
How are you going to bring injustice by having the same mindset? You know, like all of these protests and this and that, they actually have the same mindset of us versus them. It can't work. Can't work because it has to be understanding. To have understanding, we have to come together. We can't be aggressive. We can't be violent. We can't believe in the labels that we have. You are not your religion, your race, your sex, or your gender. Fundamentally, you're not. And that's the truth.
Like you mentioned, like let's say 100, 200 years ago, we didn't have radio, nothing, right? So that we just had to take care of our immediate family and your immediate reality. Then radio came about, and then television came about. Then we get to hear what's going on in other world, right? And other part of the country. Yeah. And once television came in, we actually got to see visually as well. And then that was the only kind of a source of media. But yeah, now is almost like the heightened media platform, including social media, so that you don't need to pay attention to the news or whatsoever. You just need to go and see Facebook feeds. Yeah. You already know what's going on. You already know, yeah. And whoever individual put the post up, you get to see those posts and you agree or you disagree. Whether you agree or disagree, it actually doesn't really matter. The fact is that you're absorbing it. Yeah. That's the problem.
That's the problem, yeah.
And you get to hear so many voices and too many information goes into your head. And information, whether that's good or not good, just information itself, right? Yeah. And that to distract your mind so much. That's why we are so distracted than ever, right? And any social media, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, it's just distracting you. It's constant distraction, and that's to interfere with your own thoughts, your own mind, and that only does harm to you.
It doesn't benefit your life in any way,
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. Like you said, the information overload itself is the problem.
Yes.
Like just 10 years ago, we never had the amount of information we had now. Our mind is incapable of handling that amount of information. We're not designed, we're not digital, we're analog. We're not designed to program and digest and assimilate that amount of information. It's never been the way, and it will never be the way. The reason why a lot of people are suffering from depression, anxiety, all sorts of mental health issues, in some sense, is because of the information overload. You're overloading your nervous system with a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
And what that does then, it evokes certain mentalities within you where you'll get angry or you might get extremely sad. It's pulling at your heartstrings. It's pulling at your emotions and your feelings. But if you didn't have it, shanti.
Yeah, you're fine. It drains you.
Drains
It drains
you.
your energy so much so that you just like you can't even function properly. That's to cause anxiety and depression and panic attacks and whatnot, right? It's a failure of your psychology, basically. But when you don't have it, we basically don't have phones that has all these apps and whatever.
Oh, nonsense.
But yeah, like that's just blessing for us. Yeah.
Well, we've got friends that have never had Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and they're all good. They're still alive. And they don't even know. If you say to them, I retweeted this, they'll be like, it's hard for them to understand because they don't understand the concept of a retweet.
Yeah, well, what is that? What does that
Or
do?
I shared this on Facebook. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like, cause
Yeah, that's right.
you know what I mean? Because it's
different reality.
Different reality. And so, and a lot of those people are really shanti because they haven't been introduced to this toxicity of social media where it's just noise. It's just people's opinions and noise and so forth and so on. And an informational overload. And a lot of people ask me privately, how do you get, you write so many books, you're consistent on YouTube and this and that. How do you do that? Well, I don't look at the Facebook feed. I don't scroll Twitter. I don't do that. I put the post out. I get the hell off as quick as possible. Or I reply to the things that have been directed towards me. And if I want to see what my friends are up to, and peers in writing and in Eastern spirituality, I will actually type their name in to see what they've been up to and contribute to whatever dialogue that they've got going there. But I'm not going to sit there and just scroll mindlessly. Like, I can't understand, like, you and I have seen this many times. We've been on a bus or something and someone will sit there for the whole bus trip just looking at Instagram.
That's a lot of people, though.
Yeah, I know. But it's quite amazing because all you're doing is you're mindless, first of all.
You get anxious. I get anxious.
I get anxious looking at it.
I get anxious watching people looking at the phone.
Because even the speed of the screen and like...
Oh, yeah.
Like it actually... Because your eyes are not meant to process that much information that quick. So it brings a lot of anxiety naturally. Because you and I don't do that. So when we see it, it's like, oh, man, like that's... It's overwhelming. Like... You feel like you're going to have a panic attack when you see people doing that.
Too much, yeah.
But we never had that informational overload, And so the reason why I can get a lot of things done is because I'm not, like you were mentioning, the information, and that is not, all this information is not going into my mind, distracting me from what has to be done. My passion is to teach Eastern philosophy and spirituality and also learn and be a student myself. And I've been doing that for a long time, and this is what I love. And if that's what I do and our life together personally, I have no other time for...
Already too much on the plate.
There's already too much on the plate. Like, I can't care what Kim Kardashian is up to. I can't care... Yeah, exactly. I remember years ago when my friend said, Russell Brand and... I think her name is Katy Perry. See, I didn't even really know her name. And my mate's like, what about those two? And I'm like...
It's just different.
And he was flabbergasted. He was like,
you don't know
who they are? And I was like, well, should I know who they are? Like, is it important?
Yeah, that's right.
Is it important? Do you know who Swami Savapriyananda is? And he looks at you like that. And it's like, that's more of a problem. That you don't know who he is.
Yeah.
because those two won't contribute to anything. Swami Sarvapriyananda, on the other hand,
Yeah.
you're going to enrich your life. And that's the thing. So if you're too much into that pop culture, then you're completely gone. You're completely gone. And so a part of that information is this heightened sense of morality.
Yeah.
And so that becomes the problem, for a lot of people. And that's what actually contributes to people becoming social justice warriors and becoming too pious. And Eastern spirituality is the complete opposite of morality. And that's what we need to understand. So I think we covered it pretty well, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was good.
It's a lot,
Yeah.
You and I, we love talking about amorality. And a lot of people, they don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
They just don't understand it. Even when we talk to people privately about it, they can't get out of it. See, it's about trying to get out of the idea of good and bad.
Those are too much information going on in the social media creates, I think, also a lot of hurt,
Yeah,
people
herd
grouping,
mentality. Yeah, of
herd
course.
mentality, following what that person put up the post. I think that's I agree with that, and some people say I disagree with that. And there are already enough voice out there, but they create more voice and create more herd.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so they're meant not to work.
And again, don't overestimate yourself.
Yeah.
Like I always say, like people are on social media constantly, and they're constantly saying, "Oh, I don't." How many times do I get it on my podcast, on our podcast, and on my videos where they say, "I don't agree with what you said there." That's okay.
That's okay.
I don't even know you personally, and like I'm not making content so that you agree with me.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that's not the point.
And in general, there's only usually one person. So what I would do if I was the one person who disagreed was evaluate my opinion. Because if 99% of the people are in agreement with what I'm saying, is there something wrong with me? You see? And I don't understand the mentality to quickly comment on it, because I don't comment on videos apart from my own videos. So I have watched YouTube videos before. I don't agree with the person, but I don't have any impulse to go, oh. Like I got a comment last week, and I get this sort of trolly comment every now and again. And people have this tendency, I don't know if it's become a habit, this troll tendency where people say, oh, I would reevaluate what you said there, or I would take that down and put something better up if I was you. And it's like, why and who are you, first of all?
Exactly.
So like that habit of people saying things like that to other people as if they're an authority on what you're saying. You're not even looking at yourself. Like, why am I, So like you can either trust me as some sort of authority on Eastern philosophy and spirituality because this is what I do, this is my job, or not. It's up to you, and it doesn't matter.
I would say this to that person. If you're that keen, just make a reaction video to it. Just do something about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to be heard that bad, do something about it. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people out there who are on YouTube, who are creators especially, suffer from this because there's people that just say things offhanded and are rude and not well mannered. But it affects other people. You need to remember that.
Definitely.
We can't just think that this social media world is different to the real world. It's not.
Gotta be a bit more sensitive about it.
Yeah. And that's why someone like Devdutt Patnaik gets annoyed, because he's like, he is an authority on mythology.
Yeah.
And if you can't understand that, then you just don't get it. Like, because,
Right.
you just don't get it. He is an authority on mythology. You can't just keep disagreeing with him because it conflicts with your values and your beliefs.
100%.
Yeah. Anyway, good podcast.
Yep.
Hope you guys all enjoyed. And remember, morality has nothing to do with Eastern philosophy, especially not Taoism, because these are amoral paths where we're following the path of least resistance to come into harmony with something much greater than ourselves, which actually benefits the whole world. So, enjoy, and we'll see you guys next week.